Hi, I'm Andy Ditchburn. I'm the founder and the creative director of Puro. So Puro is a brand design and digital consultancy. We work with clients all over the country. So lots of different sectors. We work with clients at all stages. We do a lot of work with startup businesses and also businesses that haven't been around for too long. And a lot of our regular, more established clients joined us originally when they started up. One of the things that we're getting asked more and more about is things like, how do we communicate sustainability? How do we tell everybody about all of the amazing green things that we're doing through our brand and through our communications? So that's what today's presentation is going to focus on. And I'm going to run through three different stages. The presentation kind of breaks down into three different areas. So the first one's strategy, followed by brand, followed by implementation. Now at Puro, we developed this strategy to use with clients when working on brand projects. So we firmly believe that if a client comes on this strategy brand implementation journey with us, if they get on board with this when they're doing a brand or a communications project, at the end of the project, ultimately they'll generate more return on investment and better results. So the first section, strategy, is all about exploring the bigger picture, asking the right questions, making sure that aims and objectives are exceeded. And brand is all about creating, developing, managing, so brand assets that are easily recognizable, and also brand assets that reflect the personality and values of the organization. And then the implementation phase is about the rollout, the communications, consistently, appropriately communicating key messages to perfect potential customers. So the analogy that I use here, I always say that this is strategy brand implementation. It's a bit like building a house. When you build a house, you start off by digging your foundations, then you move on to building your walls or your frame, and then at the end you put your architecturally spectacular roof on the house. Now, if you don't dig the foundations, the house is gonna look good for a short space of time, but ultimately it's going to fall down. And I think it's exactly the same with a brand project. If you don't do the strategy section, if you don't dig the foundations, then what you end up having might look good for a short space of time, but it's not particularly robust and it is going to fall down. So I think this project or this process is really imperative in making sure that clients maximize results and return on investment from their brand. So what I'm going to do at the end of every section, the three sections, I'm going to stop, get my breath back, have a drink, and I'm going to check in to see if there's been any questions, and I'll do my best to answer those questions. So please do ask as many questions as you want. I always say this, the more questions that you guys ask, the better the session will be. So I like lots of questions. Please do keep them coming. I just want to, before we get into strategy, I just want to touch upon this whole notion of whether something's green or sustainable, and obviously distinguishing between the two. So I'm not going to sit here and say that one's right or one's better. They're both good. But sustainable products or businesses, they're positive in all three areas of the sustainability tripod. So that would be environmental, economic, and also social. And obviously green products, that they're only focusing on the environmental part of the sustainability tripod. Doesn't mean to say that green's bad, but for me there's a difference between green and or sustainable. I'm going to talk as we go through. I'll talk around both different areas. So let's get started then with the strategy section. So this is a quote from Amy Dupont, who's head of global insights at Havas Media Group, and she says a company's sustainability efforts should be built into their core DNA. I couldn't agree more with Amy. I think she's absolutely spot on. I think it's sustainability is part of your organization, part of your brand, part of your comms. It needs to come from within the core or the heart or the DNA of your organization. It shouldn't just be a superficial thing that gets bolted on. It should come from within. One of the areas that I work on with clients is so I help people to develop what we call a core idea. So the core idea is the reason why your organization exists. It's the reason that if you're starting up your business or if you've recently started up your business, the core idea is the reason why you get out of bed every day to do whatever your business is. And then the way the core idea works, so floating around in the 4 circles, we have your product and or service. So product and or service is ultimately what you do, what you sell, what you make, what your business is. And then bottom right, we have environment. So the environment is the physical space that your business operates in. So your environment could be an office, a shop, a showroom. It could be online, it could be an app, it could be a garage, it could be a salon, whatever the physical space is. Communication is how you as a brand, how you as an organization communicate internally. Now, mechanisms that you use for communication, you can almost do things like developing language palettes or language toolkits. So these are words and phrases that we do use. These are words and phrases that we don't use. So you can take communication as far as you want. And then behavior is how either you as a person within your business or how your business as a whole behaves and acts. And all of those 4 different areas feed in to create or to help make your core idea. Now, if anybody wants to have a go at this now, I mean, I appreciate this isn't going to be the most interactive session ever, but if anybody wants to have a go at the core idea, what I would recommend is that you start off by telling us who you are, then you tell us what you do, and then you talk about how you add value or how you fix problems or what you solve. And then if you can finish off with anything about your business or anything about your business idea that's unique. So I think in marketing, I think anything that's unique is always really, really good. I mean, I work with people every day to try and figure out why they're unique. So unique can be one big thing like a patent or a design right or a contract that says you're the only person that can sell your product. It can be something like that, or it can be lots and lots and lots of little things that come together to form the reason why people would want to buy from you. So with your core idea, who you are, what you do, the problems that you solve, the value that you bring, the things that you fix, and then also anything that is unique about your business. Now, if sustainability is really, really important for you, then there's going to be lots of things woven in here. There's going to be lots of different areas that are integral. But if sustainability is important for you moving forward, then sustainability should feature somewhere, I think, within your core idea. Now, alongside the core idea, I also do something which is all about developing a set of values. So values are things that you as an organization believe in, stand for, things that are important to you. Now, your values are usually your values are usually a list of single words. It's entirely up to you how many values you have. I usually recommend round about half a dozen. So the more values you have, the more work you've got to do to enforce them and communicate them. So you can have as many as you want, but round about, half a dozen, I would say is about right. So again, if sustainability is important to you, along with lots of other different things, then sustainability, it should be a value. And what I like to do if I'm feeling particularly devious, if somebody, if we were, when we used to do this sort of thing in a room with real people, if somebody reads out a really sort of nice sounding, strong, solid set of values, if I'm feeling particularly devious, I can ask somebody to prove a value. So what I mean by that, and the way that I see this, is that you can have whatever you want as your values, but I'm entitled to ask you, what's your business going to do over the next year to reinforce those values? So if you're telling me that sustainability is important to you and it's a value of your business, something that you believe in, something that you stand for, then I want to know what you're doing to train your staff. I want to know what your carbon emission targets are by what date. I want to know how you're communicating sustainable with your suppliers, with your supply chain, with your clients. I want to know all of the things that you're doing to reinforce that value. And I think I'm entitled to think like that, because what I'm saying is that values are things that you stand for, things that are important to you, and things that you believe in. So with values, I think we need a little bit of meat on the bone. And I always like to do core idea and values at the same time with an organization. Now, I don't think it matters which one you do first. There is going to be quite a lot of overlap here. So if you've got 6 values and 3 or 4 of those words end up being in your core idea, that's totally cool. Some people like to get words down, get values down, and then create the core idea from there. Other people prefer to go the other way and start writing sentences and then start picking words out of sentences. There's going to be a lot of overlap here. It doesn't matter which one you do first or which one you find easiest. But I think it's a really cool thing to do if sustainability is part of your plan, checking back in here and having a look at this and trying to make it as central within your organization as possible. It's really, really important that you avoid greenwashing. You need to avoid greenwashing. I was looking at the BBC coverage of COP26 over the last few days, and BBC had an article on their news app around how we as consumers can spot organizations that are greenwashing. And it was things to look out for and sort of common greenwashing trends, which I thought was really quite interesting. But greenwashing is when a product or a business, they make green credentials, they say they're eco-friendly, and ultimately they spend more of their resource making sure that we know that they're eco-friendly rather than actually implementing that into their business practices. So greenwashing can be stretching, distorting, manipulating, or greenwashing can be you know, absolute lies, things that aren't true. It varies from levels of severity, but obviously it's something that you want to try and avoid doing. So tips to avoid greenwashing. So if you define your core idea and values, and then you create an action plan to prove your values, that will reduce the chances of you greenwashing. I think if you understand your target market, if you understand your audience and you figure out what their expectation levels are, how green they expect you to be. It was interesting on the BBC article, the first example that they gave, I think it was an advert from one of the budget airlines talking or claiming to be the most sustainable airline around. I think obviously with air travel moving forward, there's going to be a lot of those types of claims made. I think as consumers, when we're traveling by plane, we're gonna want to know those sorts of things. So I think what I'm saying here is figure out what your customers want to know, and also maybe what they don't need to know. So understand your market, be honest, and also be humble. So if your business or if your product or if a part of your product, if certain components aren't 100% green, then don't lie by omission. Just be honest about that, and admit that. So if one part of, or one component part of what you're delivering isn't quite there, and everything else is, I think if you tell your customers and you're honest and you're open, most people would probably be all right with that. I think I would be if somebody said, you know, this part of our packaging is not quite there yet, but we hope in the future to make some changes and get it there. I think I'd understand that. So I think being honest and being humble is really, really important. Be specific and be transparent as well. So when you are making through your communications things, if you're making any claims, then back it up with evidence. Make it easy for your customers to check what you're saying, and also I think make it easy for your customers to understand what you're saying. So keeping it as simple as possible, keeping it specific, and also transparent, I think is really important. And then finally, to avoid greenwashing, I think it's really important that you work with stakeholders. So you work with, if you have other people in your business, or if you have clients, suppliers, or key partners, so internally and externally, work with those people to make sure that greenwashing doesn't become part of your communications. I'll just check in now to see if we have any questions. Just bear with me. I'm just checking in with my email. So yes, there's a few. Thanks, guys, for asking the questions. So the first one is, how can you translate the word sustainability into a more friendly language? Yeah, so my customers can understand. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think you've got to understand your customers, and you've got to use words that they can relate to and that they understand. If your audience doesn't understand the word sustainability or doesn't understand sustainability as a thing, then put it into a language or put it into a term that they can understand. I think that in the implementation phase, choosing your language becomes really, really important. And second question is, do you have a sustainable example of core values? I'm gonna, in the last phase, the implementation phase, I'm going to show you some examples of stuff that's out there right now. I guess with your core idea, so an example might be if you were making a product and you were using recycled components, or if part of your packaging was recycled, or if the way that you delivered a service was particularly green or particularly sustainable, then that might be something that you wanted to weave into your core idea. The last question, what is greenwashing? How do we avoid it? I think we've probably done that there on the last couple of slides. But yeah, I think, I think we've done that on the last couple of slides, but I think with greenwashing, it's really, really important that you do try and avoid it, because I think if you are greenwashing or you're perceived to be greenwashing, then from a strategic point of view, your customers will lose credit. You'll lose credibility with your customers. Your customers won't feel comfortable with your product or your brand, or they won't necessarily want to buy from you. And I think whenever I've done sessions and things like this, we've talked a lot about consumers and businesses. So it doesn't matter whether you're B2C or whether you're B2B, but we've talked a lot about, individuals, consumers and businesses wanting to buy more green, wanting to buy more sustainable. And if you're perceived as greenwashing, trying to con your customers, then there's a good chance that they're not going to buy from you. But no, thanks for the questions, everyone. Please do keep them coming. It's good to see questions coming in. So that's kind of if you like, a snapshot of what I think the strategy phase is about. Obviously, we do lots of things at strategy phase, depending on the organization and depending on the project. But I think core idea and values are probably the most powerful, probably the most important. And for anyone starting off on a sustainable journey with a new business or a startup business, that's probably the place strategically that I'd suggest that you go to start. So let's move on to brand. So I think a lot of consultants talk about brand and they want to make brand as complicated as possible. They want it to be almost mystified. I mean, I want to keep things as simple as possible. So this is my definition of brand. So I think brand is how a business, organization, product or service communicates personality and differentiates themselves. So I think ultimately, brand is two things. I think brand is personality, and I think brand is difference. So brand is not marketing material. Brand is something that starts in the heart or the core or the DNA of your organization, something that filters out through your organization. Your brand identity and your marketing material, they're mechanisms around how you start to communicate your brand to the outside world. But your brand is not your marketing material, and your brand is more than just your logo. Your logo is an integral cornerstone part of your brand identity, but your brand is more than just your logo. And it says here on the slide, I don't know what branding is. people use the term branding all the time. I'm not entirely sure what they mean. I think branding is something that farmers do to their sheep so that everybody knows that the sheep belongs to them. When people say things like, I need to sort my branding out or my branding's not working, I don't quite know what they mean by that. So your brand identity then. So I like to think that your brand identity consists of various elements. I think your brand identity should consist of a logo. So that could be a font, it could be a mark, or it could be a combination of them both. I think your brand identity should probably consist of, or should probably use a strap line. I did a session a couple of weeks ago in a room with real people, and we talked about brand and strapline, and we kind of concluded that, well, why wouldn't a brand identity use a strapline? So I think you probably should. I think you should have some colors, a color palette, some color combinations. I think you should have some fonts, some typefaces, maybe 2 or 3. And then also I think you should have an image or an illustration library. So some icons, some photographs, might be stock imagery, that's fine. Could be illustrations, things that you've had drawn. But I think all of those things make up your brand identity. Your brand identity can include, after that, pretty much whatever you want or pretty much whatever you need it to. So it could be direction around layout and position of assets. So you could say things like, our logo always goes top right, our strapline always goes bottom left. You can have a language toolkit. You can create some words and phrases that you want to use, and also list some words and phrases that you don't want to use. And then we talk about like application in different environments. So I always when I'm working with a client on a brand project, I always want to establish as early as possible what the primary application is. So if you are, if you're a delivery person, then your vehicle might be primary application. If you're a cafe, it might be that it's your shop. If you're some kind of business consultant, it might be that primary application for you is your business card. So whatever application is primary for you, and then making sure that your brand identity works in all the different environments and different areas that it needs to. So I think what I'm looking for here and where I'm going with this, so what needs to happen is your core idea and your values. So sustainability and whatever else is part of your core idea and your values, that needs to flow through your organization, flow through your brand, and then ultimately get communicated through your brand identity. So with sustainability, what can we do to your logo, your font, your mark to communicate sustainability? What can you use as strapline to reinforce your green credentials? What about colors? What about fonts? What about the images that you use? How are we going to transcend sustainability through your core idea into your brand identity, which is when you start communicating with the outside world, I think. So these are 5 different things. These are 5 areas that I believe, 5 things that I think your brand identity should do. So if an existing organization asked me to review their existing brand identity, this is kind of what I'd be running through in my head. If somebody said, Andy, do we need to rebrand? I'd be asking myself these 5 questions. So the first one is communicating the personality and values of the organization. Really, really important. So going back to the core idea and the values, does your core idea and values transcend through your brand identity? Your brand identity should help to differentiate your organization from its competition. So going back to my definition of brand, I said brand was 2 things. It was personality and it was difference. So I think it's really, really important that your brand looks different to your competition and stands out from your competition. And it's really, really easy to find examples of that happening in the world today. So if you look at the high street banks, they're all different colors. For example, the high street banks don't want to use the same color as each other because they don't want to look like the competition. So differentiating is really, really important. And then your brand identity should be easily identifiable and memorable by your target audience. So one of the things that we talk about in marketing is touching potential customers. So we have to touch potential customers a certain number of times until they actually convert and buy. So if your brand identity isn't identifiable and it isn't memorable, then you're doing your marketing, you're doing your stuff, you're touching people, but they don't necessarily know that it's you touching them. And then even when they do, they might not remember that you've touched them previously. So that's really important. Your brand identity should work in different environments, different formats, and different media. So I think what I mean by that is it should work really, really small. It should work really, really big. It should work in multiple colors. Generally speaking, if your brand identity works in one color, black, then it'll work in any environment, in any format, in any media. And then finally, I think really, really important, I think your brand identity should be part of your marketing and communication strategy. If your brand identity is a standalone thing, then really it's an expensive vanity project. And over the years I've worked with people who've created lots of expensive vanity projects, but I think your brand identity should work really, really hard for your business. It should help you to fulfill your overall strategic objectives. It should be an integral part of delivering your strategy. It shouldn't just be about you, standing in the pub with your mates, handing over a business card that looks really, really cool. That for me is a vanity project. It's not part of what your business should be doing. So what I would say to everyone with this slide, depending on where you are with your business, if you've already got something in place, brand identity wise, maybe you sort of like checking in with the 5 different areas, maybe you're scoring yourself, maybe seeing if there's any particular one of these 5 areas that you think you're weak in that you need to improve upon. If you haven't created your brand identity just yet, then maybe this is a checklist, maybe this is something that you can start with, so that when you do start to develop it, you can make sure that it's doing all of these things. And then this is a quote from a brand consultant, a Spanish brand consultant. And he said, having an identity, either a personal or corporate one, is essential for succeeding. Without a strong identity, one cannot seduce, attract, amuse, or captivate anyone. Without a differentiated personality, one will go unnoticed. Now, this is quite an old quote, but I think it's absolutely spot on. There's lots of bits of this, and there's lots of phrases and lots of words that I've already shunted on about this afternoon. So I think this is, in terms of brand identity, I think this is absolutely perfect. I've got some more questions. See how we're doing for time as well. Okay, not too bad. A couple of questions. Thanks, guys, for the people who've dropped these in. Really appreciate it. So the first one is, a lot of companies are jumping on the sustainability bandwagon. How can I make my brand stand out from the crowd? I think you're absolutely right. I think a lot of companies are jumping on the sustainability bandwagon. I think what I would say is, if you're going to jump on the sustainability bandwagon, then make sure there's some foundation behind it. So, going back through what we've already talked about with core idea and values, making sure that sustainability is part of your core DNA. I think what you probably need to do to make sure that you do stand out, you probably need to do some research and just, analyze the existing brand identity of your competition. Be really, really honest about it. Say who's doing what really, really well, who's doing what badly. Figure out the proposition, the offering of your competition, your main competition, and then try and kind of craft a space for you to sit in amongst your competition, but in such a way that that you'll stand out. So I think things like figuring out the colors, the fonts, the layout of brand identity, the strap lines, various things like that, and then doing everything you can with your brand identity to stand out and to be different. Because I think it's really important. I think the world doesn't need another whatever it is that you do, the person that's asked that question, the world doesn't need another you. What the world needs is another person who does what you do, but better than everybody else. That's not super snappy, but that's ultimately what the world needs. So maybe doing some research, figuring out what other people are doing, and then creating your brand to really be different and really stand out from the competition is probably a good way to handle that. The second question, so it says, if you have an existing brand, how do you encompass sustainability, green growth without actually saying it? What does this look like in various marketing materials? So I think if we were in a room, I'd probably ask you what you did and what your product was and what your business was. But I think if I drop back a couple of slides, if I go back to all of these different areas, so all of these key things that make up the brand toolkit. So your logo, your strapline, your colors, your fonts, your images, those key elements. I think you could quite easily communicate sustainability through all of those 5 things. Now, you probably don't want to do it through all 5, because that would be overkill, and you're going to have other messages that you want to communicate. But we're seeing now, we're seeing logos getting a lot more, marks and symbols getting a lot more soft, getting a lot more circular. We're seeing, strap lines that are claiming green or sustainable credentials. Colors is really interesting, because I think we've moved on from people using green. We're seeing kind of like lilacs and almost like yellows, more organic, natural colors being used. Again, with fonts, softer fonts, softer, more gentle typography. And then again, with images, we're seeing image libraries and icons linked more to green credentials. So maybe it's not about production lines anymore. Maybe it's about, recycling units or more happy people around the plant. So I think it's without having the specifics, I realize it's super difficult to answer the question. But I don't think you necessarily want sustainability in all of these different areas, but I think you can pick which ones it would best fit for you. I think the very least you can do, and to a certain extent, probably the easiest thing that you can do, because one of the cool things about a strapline is not necessarily permanent. A strapline evolves and it changes over time. And with a strapline, organizations can have multiple straplines that they use for different markets or different parts of their offering. But probably one of the easiest, one of the quickest wins you can do here is to communicate your sustainability credentials through your strapline. And then even if every other asset of your brand identity stays the same, but your sustainability is coming through your strapline, that's probably the quickest win here, without having to, go over and rework too much. So like I say, thanks guys for the questions. There'll be a little bit of time at the end, so please do keep them coming. So let's move on then. Finally, we're going to move on to the implementation section. Doing pretty good for time. So with implementation, this is all about so you've done your strategy work, you've dug your foundations, you've created your brand identity. Implementation's now about rollout, about moving out into the real world, and the sustainability and the green messages that you want to communicate. This is when we start to push those out. So what I'm going to do in this section, I've got 3 quotes that I'm going to chat around, three bits of advice, and then I'm going to show some examples of stuff that's going on right now that I think's really quite nice. So the quotes are from somebody called Fiona Bainey, who is head of sustainability at Dragon Rouge, who are a European-based brand consultancy. And so first of all, she said, don't use the S word as the lead marketing message. She said, sustainability in itself is not a benefit, so it needs to be communicated in addition to traditional marketing cues that mainstream buyers respond to. She said it often doesn't work if it's the lead message. Now, I kind of half agree with this. I think the world's changing right now. Obviously, everything that's going on with COP26, I think the world's changing massively. So I think sustainability is going to become a lead message, and you probably are considering making it the lead message for you. What I would say is, yes, make it the lead message, but push other stuff alongside it as well. So you're going with sustainability as the lead message, but you've got other things alongside it. I think with marketing and with marketing messages, we want you to stand out, and we want you to communicate your personality and your difference. If the whole world suddenly starts communicating sustainability and you're also doing that, then you're not going to stand out. So what I would say with this is make sure that you don't just go sustainable. Make sure that you have other key messages that you want to push out there through your implementation. She said, tell a story and make it beautiful and sexy. So when sustainability messages are interwoven into the fiber of brand purpose and story, credibility shines through and customers respond. I totally agree with this. We all know how important telling stories is in brand and marketing. And I think if you can weave sustainability messages into your brand story and your brand purpose, along with other key marketing messages, then I think that's a pretty cool place to be. And then finally, she said, whatever you do, do not educate your customer. Tell stories, inform them, delight them, and inspire them, but stay clear of education. That's what schools are for. Totally agree with this. I think people do this all the time unintentionally in their marketing material. I worked quite a few years ago with an acupuncture lady, and she was, through her marketing and her communications, she was doing a really, really great job of communicating the benefits of acupuncture. She was educating her potential customers around why they should have acupuncture. What she wasn't doing was then saying why we should have acupuncture with her. So I think a lot of people fall into the trap of educating, selling the idea of their product or service, selling the sustainability benefits of their product or service, and then creating a situation whereby customers go and buy elsewhere. I think you've got to be careful as well when you educate people that it doesn't become patronizing, or that you don't talk at a level that people don't quite get. So you can come across as being patronizing, or you can come across as being confusing if people don't necessarily understand what it is that you're trying to say. So I think this is pretty well. I think it's excellent advice. You've got to communicate your sustainability and your green credentials without going too far down the educating the customer types of routes. Time for some examples now. I'll run through some examples of stuff that's happening right now that I think's working really, really well. Hoping these examples will help with a couple of the previous questions that people very kindly asked as well. I've got 3 examples in total. I've got, the first one is a product that I've picked out, which I think's really quite nice. And then I've got a couple of examples where their communication campaigns and products around the amount of plastic that we're consuming as a nation. So the first example here is a product. I wanted to, Pero we do a lot of work in the food and drink sector. So I wanted to pick something out that an agency had done that I thought was really nice. I wanted it to be a food or a drink based product. So this is Kib, and the whole concept behind Kib, or the whole core idea, if you like. So it's inspired by the concept of circularity. So it's East African, it's the Ethiopian specialty herbs are grown by farmers, by landowners from small holdings, and then they're sourced to be used in the product. So I think the brand identity, obviously the circularity theme is really, really important. They're communicating that really, really nicely with the white circle on the colored backgrounds. If you look as well, it's very, very subtle, but if you look at the counter of the B, so the middle part of the B, it's not usually a circle, but in this particular brand identity, it is exactly circular. Colours are lovely. The little strap line there, what grows around comes around. I think it's really, really nice. The packaging is, so packaging designers, we talk a lot about standout and shelf presence. And I think what the agency who created this brand identity, what they did was they did a lot of research into the leading tea brands in supermarkets, and a lot of them used strong coloured backgrounds, and that kind of forced them to make Kib white. So it's clean, it's fresh, it's modern, it's confident. The illustrations used in the round circles there, I think are really, really nice, really, really strong. And for me with this, it's really, really easy to see. I don't know this information, but I can imagine their core idea, the notion of circularity, and that strategically moves through into their brand and is communicated through their brand. And then at the implementation phase, it's also communicated on apps, digitally, on the actual packaging itself, and on the websites. So I think this is lovely. I think this is a really, really good example of a brand that's doing a great job of communicating their sustainability credentials. This is a particular product. This is a type of plastic that can be used in packaging, and then over time, the plastic kind of automatically decomposes. So it's all about removing plastic from the supply chain, and they talk about reducing our plastic footprint. So the whole concept of the product is about the degrading and the disappearing, and then that starts to come through really, really nicely in the actual brand identity. So you can see bits of the typography, bits of the fonts where they're starting to degrade. The color palette is a little bit muted, a little bit natural, and the graphics there around the 18 days. So again, I think this is a great example of a product that has a sustainability claim, a sustainability credential, and it's been communicated right through all of the different types of marketing touch points. Another great example for me. And then finally, this is something that happened. This was created by a Lisbon agency. They did this work in about 4 days' time, and it was all part of Plastic Free July. So I think there was some kind of research done by The Guardian. The Guardian announced that the average person swallows a credit card-sized amount of plastic each week. When I read that, I've got to be honest, that I found that quite worrying and quite scary. But I think it's talking about consuming broken down plastic particles in various types of food packaging that we consume. So the line here is use less plastic, eat less plastic. And then there's quite a few different, there's a series of different illustrations, and they use the kind of like the chip and pin credit card. There's a lot of, I didn't want to put it on the slides, but there's a lot of animation and a lot of moving graphics around this campaign. And then got an example there to finish off with, which is a billboard poster. And again, it's got a lot of the types of plastic packaging, maybe single-use packaging, which is obviously really, really bad. And then they're highlighting, along with all of the credit cards, they're highlighting the line, the average person swallows a credit card size amount of plastic each week. So 3 different examples there of stuff that's going on right now that I think is really, really cool. And I hope with the first 2 examples, what I'm really trying to get across is that we can begin to understand what the core idea and values are, certainly of Kib, and how that's transcended through to the actual brand. And then also when we get to the implementation phase, digital assets, packaging, various other things like that on the shelf. Just got some final thoughts. And then if there is any more questions, I can take those. So final thoughts. So look at your current situation and review your current situation. If you're new, if you're just starting up, you're in a really cool place because you've got a clean slate. If you've got stuff in place already, have a look at it, be honest, review it. Revisit your core idea and values. If you've done similar work to that, so the business model canvas and value proposition is very, very similar. If you've done any work around that particular area, go back, have another look, revisit it. And I think it's really important to say as well, for me, with your core idea and your values, they're dynamic. They should change all the time. They should evolve. They should get better. Your business is going to change. Being honest is really, really important. Be honest about where you are currently. Make sure you get everybody on board. So talked about stakeholders, both internally and externally. Make sure that, everybody, as many people as possible, get on board with your business journey, whatever your business journey is. The way I always put this is that if I know what you're trying to achieve, then there's a chance I might actually help you to do it. If I don't know what you're trying to achieve, then even if I want to help you, I can't, so I don't know what you're trying to do. So getting everyone on board is really, really, really important. Create and commit to an achievable plan. So I think with things like values, if you're a startup business with your values, you're not going to be there with them all yet. But I think it's totally cool to say, these are my values, and this is what I'm going to do over the next 6 months to prove those values. And then the last thing on the slide here, and I'm not here to preach. I don't want to preach, but I think that, everybody, before we can do anything around sustainability and green, we all have to admit that something has to be done. We all have to admit that some things are going to have to change. And I think we all have to admit as well that we can all do a ton load more than what we're currently doing. So I think this notion of acceptance is really, really quite important. And then the last slide just says, thank you all for listening. Thanks for your questions. Just checking. Yeah, there's a few more which I'll pick up right now. Okay, so thanks again, guys, for the questions. Really, really good. So what do you think the main barriers are when chatting to customers about green products? I think that's a really good question. I think if I'm being honest, the main barrier is probably the perception that green is going to cost. I think that's something that consumers are always going to have at the back of their minds. I know from projects that I've been involved with over the years, whenever sustainable or green comes up, there's a sad notion that it's always going to cost more. But I think, with all of the stuff going on in the world right now with COP26, and there is going to be, the end of this year, beginning of next year, there's going to be a massive shift. We're all going to feel, we're all going to experience big changes. So I hope that those main barriers do get broken down. And then the last question, what marketing platforms are the most effective when marketing green growth? Any platforms to watch for in the future, i.e. TikTok? So thanks again, that's a great question. My answer is going to be really, really boring. So I think that the most effective channel to market any kind of credentials on would be the channel that your perfect potential customers are on. So I think when we talk about marketing channels, the answer is not really for me a sustainability one. It's more of a traditional marketing answer, which is in terms of marketing channels, just go where your customers are. So that could be email marketing, that could be Twitter, it could be advertising, it could be Google Ads, whatever particular channel your customers are on. I think people keep asking me about TikTok. TikTok's like the kind of the buzz thing of the moment. I think right now TikTok's very, very much B2C, so it's business to consumer. And I think also right now with TikTok, it does have a very, very young audience. Now, obviously, when we look at what happened to channels like Instagram, we know that over time, the TikTok audience is going to get older. The age range is going to expand. I guess yes. If somebody twists my arm and said you have to pick a marketing channel which you think is going to explode in the next 5-10 years, right now I'd probably go TikTok because I don't think there's too much else happening behind it. But I would always say with your channels, go where your customers are, figure out who your perfect potential customers are, your audience, and then jump onto the same channels as those guys. I think that's all of the questions. I'm doing pretty good for time. Thanks again, everybody, for listening. I've really enjoyed presenting today. And I do need to say that there's a feedback form. Not entirely sure where it is, but you guys can, if you can find the feedback form, and then please send that back in, that would be fantastic. Thanks again for listening. Thanks, guys.